Welcome to the Frontline podcast, brought to you in association with the Atla Group. Atla Group is a collaboration of businesses with a collective history of over 130 years, bringing financial solutions to its clients in the world of accountancy, audit, advisory, fiduciary and retirement benefit solutions. Visit atla.im today. On the Frontline podcast, we chat to leaders in business and successful entrepreneurs to bring you their in-depth and bite-sized opinions that will add value to you and your mind.
Philip, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time.
Yeah, Martin, good to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Pleasure. Perhaps for our listeners, you perhaps just give a quick introduction to yourself. And obviously we're here primarily to talk about esports, albeit some of your background as well, but perhaps how you got into esports as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have now been involved in esports for over 20 years. I started at the age of 16. One of my friends bought me the Half-Life Generations pack. It was a video game for Christmas. And I started to play that. And one of the things that came in the box was an add-on or an extension called Counter-Strike. Which was a shooting game. And I started to play that and I realized that a couple of my friends at school were also playing it. So together we created a team and then started thinking about how we could get involved in tournaments and competitions. So yeah, that was my first entry into esports, and I've been involved ever since.
And how was I say back then, not knowing your age, assuming a little while ago, what was I use the word cutting edge. Was that a common thing, tournaments back then, or was that just the beginning of the path we're on now?
It was the beginning of it. So this was 2001. Esports arguably started sort of 1999. So it was only a couple of years in, and there weren't that many games that started to have tournaments around them. Counter-Strike was one of the main game titles. And I think that the biggest thing back then is that it was all done for passion. People who were players said, what am I playing for? Well, there isn't much. Okay, maybe I'll go and create something. So that's where you'd get the news portals created and talking about what's happening in the community. You'd get people taking it on themselves to create and administer tournaments and leagues and events and things like that. And while that still happens now, obviously it's also become a lot more commercialized and people setting up things of different scales. But yeah, back then, certainly when I started, and thinking about the UK scene as it was, a lot of it was people just taking it on themselves to create things, and I certainly got involved in that as well. I became player to also being a journalist and writing the news stories for the news portals, then supporting setting up events and managing my own tournaments, and again it was full immersion into that community and that experience because it was also so new. It was something that it was the first time that I'd been able to get online. And then I started playing online. So it was a whole new world that opened up to me. And, all those experiences was like, I'll just dive straight in. And, I used to spend 5 hours a night practicing with my team and getting involved in the communities and having conversations. And, yes, my parents frowned on that. But, over time, they also started to recognize how I was spending my time, what I was doing, the relationships that I was building, the experiences that I was having. But yeah, it's very different now in terms of where esports has got to.
That's interesting, actually, thinking about relationships and the I suppose the skills you're building during that. So I guess that's skills that fill in the gaps: leadership,
communication, problem solving, strategy. All those sorts of things. Absolutely. One of the great things about one of the great things about games that a lot of people often miss is that if you're playing an online game, it's pretty much guaranteed to be different every time you play it. It may be that the map is different in the environments. It may be that the team that you are playing with or against is different, and therefore, again, they have a different interpretation of how to play or the strategies that they use. So yeah, that problem solving, communication, teamwork, leadership, all those sorts of soft skills, yes, are almost naturally built in to playing video games and certainly playing online.
Yeah, perhaps on the outside, people who are not involved in it might not, or I suppose wouldn't consider those attributes. So maybe to jump right ahead, I know you've touched on, I've seen in your content around math-based video games. I suppose tying that back to, I suppose, education, if they're soft skills you're learning. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what that project is that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have started a project focusing on developing the math skills of children aged 6 to 11, but by using the video games they already play. So Minecraft, Roblox, FIFA, Fortnite, games like that. And I'm focusing that age group for a couple of reasons. One is that, I have nieces and nephews in that age group. And my partner is a primary school teacher. So she needed a lesson plan one day for a maths lesson. She didn't have anything, so if I take a step back quickly, teachers often, if there are multiple teachers teaching the same age group, they'll share the planning. So somebody may focus on maths, somebody different will focus on science, somebody different will focus on English, and so on. So she got to a point where she didn't have a maths lesson from her colleagues and had to create one almost, for the next day. From the conversations we'd had at home, I knew that all of her students loved the Among Us game. They were 9 years old. So we then sat and worked out, how can we use the game reference and tie it into maths? So actually it worked really well because the topic was perimeter. And, in the game, you have, one of the levels is a spaceship and it has different rooms within it. And you as a character, as a player, go around different rooms and you do different tasks to try and win the game. Now, each of those rooms is a different shape, different size. So we then thought, well, okay, could we get them to redesign all of the rooms and think about the perimeter for the rooms? They put some constraints in place to say, okay, well, you've got 5 rooms, it's got to be a maximum of this perimeter. If you add them all together, each one's maybe got to be a minimum of this, and again, have that problem solving. But I got the text message the next day on WhatsApp, and it was like, they're hooked, they love it. So that started me on that. Okay, so if this has worked from a lesson plan perspective, is there a way that I can use that knowledge and experience to create other types of resources? So, I created some and shared them with parents. Their feedback was also, the kids recognize the link to the video games. Yeah. They want to sit down and do the work. And maths is a repetition thing. The methods and the concepts, it takes repetition to make it stick. So if we can get children to sit down and say, oh, I recognize that, it's linked to the game that I love, I'm willing to sit down and put that time and effort in, then there's a greater chance that those methods and concepts will stick and it will improve their maths. So it's now one of the projects that I'm focusing on, primarily for parents, and I'm trying to support them. And 15 minutes a day is all it takes. If you can get your child to sit down and work through a couple of questions, and they do that every day, and you can build it into a routine, then you're putting them on the right path to develop those skills and that knowledge.
Yeah, I guess like any learning, often it's relatable, isn't it? So yeah, if they're relating to the game because it's something they know day to day, to then learning those practical math skills. Yeah, it makes sense. So is that something you do as a side project, or is that where you're completely focused at the moment?
It's a side project. I'm sort of running 2 things in parallel. So from the work that I've done in the esports and gaming industry, I'm now taking all of that knowledge and moving it into the education space. So yes, I am creating courses based on esports business. I'm supporting entrepreneurs. I do business coaching on the industry. But that maths piece is sort of a side project that I am trying to grow. And, I've set myself a mission, not sure how long it will take me, but a mission to develop the math skills of 1 million children using the methods and the resources that I've created. And as part of that, I'm in the process of writing a book. How can parents do all this? How can they use those games? What's involved? How can they identify the opportunities for creating maths questions? All that sort of stuff. So yes, it's a core part of what I do as a whole now within the education space.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So just to rewind a little bit, to go back to those early days in esports, you went on to university, if I believe correctly. Does that, again, what did you study there? Was that linked into the esports? What was the path you took there?
I would say this is where it starts to get interesting, and there's another link to the maths here. Okay, so I started a computer graphics degree. Computer visualization was the title. I was a BSc honours, and I got through to the second year, and it was a module on 2D and 3D graphics. that was pretty much just all maths. So 2D and 3D graphics, you're thinking about how you plot points within a three-dimensional space. Okay, and if you're thinking, okay, whether it's a character or it may be an object in a game, you need to work out all the maths for how you want something to move. Okay, I couldn't do that maths. I failed that module twice, which also then meant I couldn't stay on the course.
Right.
So I had to move, and I chose to move to computer business, which in hindsight is probably the better decision. But yes, I started on one path because I wanted to go and be in a position to create the worlds or the types of worlds that I'd experienced as a player. But I then had to take a slightly different line. But I guess the most interesting thing is during that time, I'd been headhunted to manage one of the world's best esports teams. It was called Four Kings back in the day. And because it was an honours course, I had a third-year placement year, meant to be a year in industry. And I was able to convince my university to let me manage the team for a year, which meant I was then able to travel to Taipei, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Sweden, US, and went to Dallas, Germany, wow, France, and a couple of other places to go to events and conferences and things. So my year in industry was, I guess it was different in a couple of senses. One, that I was able to travel, and two, that it wasn't a traditional year in industry because I was able to convince my university to let me manage an esports team when esports was still in its infancy.
So when we look at management, perhaps then and now, what was going on then, and what is different now if you look at management of esports teams?
So the structure has changed, certainly at the pro level. Okay, so I mentioned this was one of the world's best teams. They were sponsored by Intel. So that's where a lot of the budget came from. And the tour that I did to the Far East was a tour funded by Intel. They wanted to take one of our world champions, do some PR, radio interviews, TV interviews, things like that. So I went with them almost as a bit of a chaperone and to keep things on brand. Those early days, it was still a lot for passion. Now you see a lot more paid roles, and there are a lot more roles from a traditional business structure. You'll have a CEO, you'll have a COO, you might have a chief people officer, you'll have departments specifically for creative and social and, coaching and analysis for the players and the teams and their performance. You'll have support functions, nutritionists, psychologists, physios, all that sort of stuff. Again, talking the pro level here, the amateur level, they haven't necessarily got the resources to put those roles in place. But as we're starting to see the esports pro teams, be able to secure investment rounds of $10 and $20 million, some of those funds are being used to sort of structure the teams in a very different way and mirror some traditional sports teams and big businesses. So yes, it's very different from, for us in that team, this is 2004 to 2007, there were three of us on the management team. One guy was the owner. He had overall responsibility. I focused on the brand and marketing, and then there was one guy who was focused on liaising with the teams and acting as a team manager, and then had all the players under that, and then some supporting people doing ad hoc graphics and that type of stuff. So that still exists, as I said, at the amateur level where those resources aren't necessarily there, but the pro level, it has become a lot more structured in terms of how they approach situations and the types of roles that we now see.
I'd imagine that certainly then at that time, that role and that ability to travel around really complemented, I guess, the degree you were doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, computer business, trying to understand the industry and make sense of. One of the modules was e-business, so not e-commerce, but how you potentially utilize. Again, early days of growing World Wide Web, the internet, whatever you want to call it. And how you can position a business, create a business, how you interact with your customers, how you attract them, how you retain them. A lot of those things we see now traditionally in a lot of business courses, but at that point, this was almost 20 years ago. It's like, slightly different perspective on things because a lot of those technologies that we take for granted now, and a lot of the platforms that we take for granted didn't exist. It's very different, and even setting up tournaments and being able to do broadcasts for tournaments in esports was massively different. There was no Twitch.
No.
the cost to do a tournament broadcast was astronomical because of the bandwidth that you needed to be able to get a feed to the internet and the hosting to go with that, and the equipment that you needed it's a very different world.
Yeah, I'd imagine, and certainly over those 20 years watching, I guess you've watched that evolution to where a 10-year-old can now, broadcast through his own channel on his computer in his bedroom. The transition's unreal, but really.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's continuing to change. What are we, 2 years, maybe 3 years? TikTok. Okay, again, that's changed the game again because it's gone short form, and yes, YouTube is looking at that, but that whole environment and yes, the challenge for parents to say there are all these new things coming, and if I don't take the time to understand, then my child is potentially going to be on these new platforms and these new tools, and I'm not going to have an appreciation of how they're using them, who they're interacting with, and things like that. So technology, as we know, continues to change at a rapid pace.
So you finish your university, stumble out of there. How does obviously you're on a career path now. Where does that take you?
So I actually decided to step away from the team. A couple of tough internal conversations that were going on at the time. And I set up my first business, which is a consultancy company on the industry, trying to help brands and other stakeholders understand what esports was all about, how it fits as part of the overall games industry. And that's one of the key things to highlight is that esports is a small part of the overall video game industry. The video games industry as a whole, revenue-wise, is bigger than film, TV, music combined. Okay, but esports is still such a small part of that. Easy maths, it's 200 billion versus 2 billion. Okay, so trying to help people understand how esports works, what's involved, the events, the tournaments, the teams, the players, the broadcasts, and supporting them in creating campaigns that make sense for their brand. So predominantly, I was focusing on working with brands, and through that time, I was able to do some campaigns for Microsoft and Telefonica and a couple of other people. One was a broadband company in the UK. So again, it was an interesting experience because now I was on the vendor supplier side to say, I can support you in building your strategy, and then I can help you manage the projects and the deliverables. So rather than being a team, it's more of a sort of probably classed as an agency.
Okay. And so just to go back to starting their own business, that's, a big step, I guess, still to me at a young age. If you had tips for people that were, what have you learned from that experience that you could share with people?
Diversify and don't put all your eggs in one basket. And the challenge that we all have is that, we go, oh, great, I've got a client or I've got a project. I'll put all of my time and effort into that. And while you need to do that to an extent to make sure that it's successful, because, you've agreed that you're going to deliver something, whether that is time, whether it's an effort, whether it's a set of deliverables and outcomes. But the challenge is you also need to reserve some time to go and find what's next or something that sits in parallel. So, for me, I can openly admit I didn't do that. So when the 2008 financial crisis hit, I had one major client who then says, stop in all marketing, in this area, need to focus on other things. I was left with nothing. I ended up having to close it down. I had a quarter life crisis at sort of 25. Took myself off to Cyprus for a month to visit some friends to try and work out what I was going to do next. So yeah, it's tough. It's, you can feel good about securing something, and that's great. You need to focus on that, but you also need to think about what's next.
So it's an interesting point to pick up on as well, because I think, and the word failure it's a horrible word, but when you look at, you mentioned earlier on about the course you did and perhaps going down an avenue on that course that didn't work out, that, let's attach the word failure. It's not the right word, but that's the word. A business.
It's a learning opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I guess a message again to listeners is that we constantly fail. That's part of our learning experience, is to be aware of that and learn from that. I guess that's something you've experienced that I suppose all of us have in some context, but to embrace that as well.
Yeah. I mean, if I look back at the things that I've done in esports and gaming, have there been some successes? Absolutely. Have there been some, inverted commas, what I would class as failures. They're learning opportunities, yes, but I didn't achieve what I was aiming to achieve. So, whether you tag that as a failure, absolutely, there are some of those things, and that's just part of being human.
Yeah.
If you take personal development courses, or go and read or listen to the philosophers, it's like, actually, the only time you fail is if you don't try, because you'll never know what could have been, what you could have achieved. So, I can say, yes, I've tried. Some things didn't work out. I class them as failures, but now I own and accept that because I've been able to learn from those experiences.
Yeah, and assume you touched on there about helping and what's the right word? I suppose coaching and development of others. Maybe talk a little bit about that and what, how you, I suppose, got into that through own experiences and how that's going and how you approach that.
Yeah, interesting story, because everybody thinks that the world's changed, sort of February, March 2020 because COVID started. For me, it actually all changed in January 2020. And that's because I broke my neck playing rugby. Mm-hmm. I didn't get the surgery that was suggested, and I sort of let it heal naturally, which thankfully it has. But that situation for me started getting me thinking about, okay, well, what am I doing with my life? What impact am I having? How can I contribute more? It's one of those life moments, and you're like, oh, he's almost jolted awake to say, am I just meandering through life, or should there be something more? So that started me down a personal development path. I paid for some coaching on the business side, on the personal side, and taking courses and things like that. And that's what led me to the education side and trying to share my knowledge and experience in a different way. I'd already been doing it for clients and on projects, but that was one client and one project at a time. So now I'm trying to change the focus and create solutions. I mentioned courses already, so that I can try and help more people not only succeed in the things that they want to do, but also avoid some of the as I say, the failures or the challenges that I had, certainly in esports as I went through and grew my career.
And how's the back now?
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, so when I had the injury, I got some scans. It was suggested to have surgery, put a plate and screws in. So it's C5, C6, so just at the bottom of the neck. I didn't. COVID happened. All the hospitals closed anyway. So I'm in Dubai. When COVID happened, it was almost an immediate lockdown. There was a nightly curfew because they were spraying the streets with disinfectant. You had to get a permit to leave your home to go shopping. All the hospitals were only dealing with COVID cases. So again, I just left it. But 18 months after, so this was the middle of last year, I got another set of scans, different consultant. He was like, okay, your neck is slightly twisted and it's impinging the nerve, but from a strength perspective and a mobility perspective, you're good to go. Just don't do anything silly like go and play rugby again. On the whole, thankfully, it's all good now. But again, for me, I now look at it, and obviously the personal development that I've done, it's almost a case of that was meant to happen because it set me on a different path and it changed my perspective on absolutely everything. Yeah,
really interesting. Okay, really interesting. So looking at, I want to touch on child safety in esports. I think that's an area you've looked at previously. I guess generally it's always going to be a hot topic because esports naturally attracts the younger audience, certainly as a start point. Maybe talk a little bit about that, your work in that area.
Yeah, child safety is an interesting one. So 2008 and 2009, there was a UK government review called the Byron Review. So the government issued a project type, I guess it's probably the easiest way to describe it. And they pulled in Professor Tanya Byron, who'd done a lot of work in the space for child safety, general child education, child development, all that sort of stuff. And the review of the project was to look at child safety online. So I acted as a consultant for that, helping the internal team who were conducting the review and the project understand more about the gaming side. And actually, it's not just about what happens inside the game. From my own experiences, as I've already mentioned, I went from playing the game to being in a team to then writing for the news portal to having chat conversations in different tools. It's like, Okay, you need to understand that. And this still goes for parents now. It's, yes, you've got a game environment, and there may be things that can happen in that, but there are also other places where conversations around gaming take place that your child may be getting involved in. And actually, it's interesting that we're having this conversation right now, because literally yesterday, maybe the day before, Roblox, which is one of the sort of the core platforms that children have been using to play. So Roblox is a platform where game developers can create their own experiences and put it on, and then players can come and choose what they want to play. So Roblox has had some negative press in the past and negative sentiments that it's not fit for children, just because some of those game experiences have been created by people who aren't the company themselves. And Roblox have updated their age rating system for the platform and for the games. So where it was E for everyone before as a platform, because as a platform, again, they weren't necessarily looking at each individual game experience. Now they've shifted that to say, actually, it is 13 plus, but parents, you can now have some more controls over what you potentially restrict your child in accessing or seeing, or who they can communicate with, can they purchase. So again, that's a big step for them. So yeah, child safety is something that I've always tried to keep an eye on. It is a topic of concern, but because of my own experiences, this may be a polarizing comment. It's not the game's fault. The responsibility a lot of the time is on the parents to understand what children can do, how the game works. Does it have chat? Yes or no? Can you restrict some of that access? Yes or no? Can you put in place the parental controls? Yes or no? The challenge that I see, as I go to different parts of the world, and you may have experienced this yourself, you go into a restaurant, family comes in, sits down, and the first thing that happens is, a child gets handed a tablet just to keep them occupied. And you sit there and go, okay, I can sort of understand why you're doing that. There are positives and negatives of that, but do you actually fully understand what your child is doing and has access to? Have you taken the time to have a conversation with them about it, to understand? Have you taken the time to dive in yourself and either play the game or watch the videos or anything else, to be able to say, I now have a better understanding. I know where I want to set the boundaries for my child, or have you just handed it over and you're hoping for the best? So yeah, I said that may be a polarizing position for me, just based on my experiences of being a player, and my mum spending time trying to limit me to 1 hour a day playing and trying to get an understanding of what I was playing and what I was involved in. That's where I position that actually, yes, the games companies are doing a lot, and there are the age rating systems, and there are parental controls and things that you can put in place to protect your child. It's still down to you as the parents to do that learning and make those decisions.
Yeah, I guess that applies in all aspects. It doesn't matter. It's gaming, does it? They're going down the road to play with other kids.
Absolutely, going to the park, going into town to go to the cinema. It's like those risks are
and they're there for the parents.
Almost universal.
Yeah.
It's then the parents and how they choose to manage that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So appreciating we're short on time. I want to touch on two other quick things. You're out in the Middle East now. What took you out there?
My dad. So I've been working for some startups and in jobs that I wasn't enjoying. He got a job for Etihad. So his background, was a pilot. So he started in the forces, in the Navy, as did my mum. He then went commercial, spent 26 years working for Monarch before they obviously encountered some troubles. First round of redundancies, he said, I'll take voluntary retirement. Then got offered a role at Etihad in Abu Dhabi. So he started there December 2014. I came to visit him twice in early 2015. A week each time, just on a holiday to see what he was getting involved in and what the atmosphere was like, and then decided there's no rain. I'm going to pack everything up in the UK, move over and start from scratch. So that's what I did. So I moved over on the 5th of July, 2015. So that is my Independence Day. Because it completely changed my life. As I've been out here, yes, I'm running a business now still within the games industry, but almost it started afresh, had to develop a whole new network of business contacts, of people. I met my partner out here, which is great. So yeah, I've been here now for 7 years.
And the space you work in, is it, I guess a lot of stuff generally, and as we certainly found post-COVID especially, is online anyway, but when you first went out there, were they behind the curve on where you'd been previously, and is that something you're trying to help that area to move in that direction?
It is, yeah. So one of the things I looked at as I was moving out here was to say, actually, they're passionate about gaming, but the infrastructure isn't really here. It's sort of 5 years, 6 years behind where the UK is. Maybe, yes, there's an opportunity to share my knowledge and experience and help develop that. So that's what I've been doing over the years. I've been consulting into governments, I've been consulting into brands here in the region, some of the federations, sport federations, things like that. So trying to help elevate them, and we're starting to see that rapid progress and rapid growth, certainly here in the UAE, but also in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia last week, again, people have different views on the country. It's interesting when you go and see things firsthand. I've done regular trips into the kingdom and done some consultancy projects and things over there. But last week, and based on the time we're at right now as we're doing this interview, the Crown Prince announced a new gaming and esports strategy. And one of the pillars of that was to look at generating 39,000 direct and indirect jobs by 2030.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's not a small undertaking. There was also things, contribution to GDP and various other things that they're working towards. But that jobs piece and trying to create an overall ecosystem and environment. So yes, that's esports, and it's players and it's teams and it's tournament organizers, but it will also be development studios for games and companies like that, because they're trying to create the whole games ecosystem.
That's a big commitment, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So one final quick question, and to go back to, I know we touched on earlier about coaching and self-development. We talked with a number of entrepreneurs around, more broadly speaking, tips and experiences from their own. They're sat here today looking back, that people starting on their professional journey, whatever career, it doesn't have to be esports, does it? Any career, general tips for people, for individuals looking to, just develop and self-develop. It's obviously a very broad question.
It is a broad question.
A thousand answers to it, but from your own experience, if people have to focus on a certain area, what might?
Okay, so I'm gonna. If we're thinking, and we take the questions broad, then not necessarily for people who want to start a project or start their own business, just people trying to develop their careers and develop their lives. I'm going to give you two things, okay, if I've got time.
Absolutely.
One is you need to understand why, okay? And you may be a fan of Simon Sinek, and it is a key question. Why are you doing what you do? Is there a purpose behind it? Is it part of a longer journey that you have set yourself? Goals, visions, all those sorts of things. Is it just because you need to, and you feel you need to pay the bills? And we've all got that challenge. But the question is there something else that you could be doing that may be a passion, that maybe sits closer to you as an individual, and what it is that you want to achieve and experience? So that would be one thing, is to ask yourself and get clear on that why. The second one, and probably more relevant, is time management. We all have the same amount of time in the day. And as I teach entrepreneurs, I try and give them 3 tool sets or toolkits that they can use. So the first is habit stacking. So this comes from James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits. And it's about saying, if you can identify in your daily life things that you always do, like brushing your teeth, okay? Are there things that you can immediately add in to all of those automatic behaviors, so that you start to condition yourself to do something new immediately after? So again, it may be you get up in the morning, before you go to the office, you make yourself a coffee, okay? Again, are the things that you can potentially do straight after that, even if it's, I'm waiting for the kettle to boil quick, I'll do 3 squats, Okay, it's about trying to see if you can stack new behaviors on top of ones that you already have. The second tool is Net Time. This comes from Tony Robbins, who's arguably one of the world's greatest personal development coaches and business coaches. And Net Time is no extra time. So are there things that you can do at the same time as doing something else that you don't need to find extra time in your calendar? So a great example is if you're wanting to listen to podcasts, can you do that while you're driving to work? Can you put your headphones on while you're cooking dinner and listen to something so that you don't need to find extra time for doing that? And then the third one is time boxing. So time boxing is looking at your calendar and actually putting in time that you want to dedicate to certain tasks. So there's a school of thought that says a task will expand to whatever the amount of time is that you give it. If you time box and say, I've only got half an hour for this, I've only got half an hour for this, okay, then you would work to try and get that task or that item done within that time. What time boxing also enables you to do is to say, are there specific things that I want to focus on that may not be on the job, but it's, again, that long-term vision or some of the things that I want to do, whether it's, coaching, my kids' sports team, volunteering, if you time box them and actually put them in your calendar, more likely to happen because you're trying to make that commitment to yourself that you're going to spend that time. For me, in the work that I do, one of my main time boxing things is I have a time in the morning that is, I put for deep work. So I know I'm my most creative first thing in the morning. So that sort of 9 to 10:30 slots. If I need to think about how do I write a proposal for a project, how do I plan for the next month, whatever it may be, that's the sort of time slot that I'll put in. The other one then is, when my partner gets back from school, I'll try and dedicate a time to sit down with her, have a conversation, see how her day's been. And so I will not, if I can help it, not try and put any calls and things within that time. So time boxing is another useful tool in terms of time management. So those would be the ones that I would give you.
So, you're not allowed to use Atomic Habits, which is a great book. If you had another book to recommend to people to pick up, where would that be? To put you on the spot.
On the topic of time management, or just
in
general?
Yeah, just development, coaching, I guess, all that side of it. Because like we talked about, I named a few famous people there with many books out as well. But if you have to say, don't pick this one off the shelf, which one would you?
So I'll give you two. Indistractable by Nir Eyal, who also, again, talks about some of the time management things. And the other one would be How to Get From Where You Are to Where You Want to Be by Jack Canfield.
Okay. Well, hopefully our listeners will go and find them. And perhaps at some point we could do another podcast on leadership coaching, personal development. We've done some with a few other coaches previously, and I think they're really interesting. Really interesting conversations for people. So appreciate your time. I think there's 1,000 other things we could have got into, but appreciate time is tight. So thanks for your time, Philip. I appreciate you joining us today.
Not a problem. Thank you. I appreciate it and the invite. Thank you, Martin.
No problem. Thanks for listening, everyone.